Hello, everybody. My name is Jay, and normally I do these type of videos on either my music YouTube or my gaming YouTube. But I just watched a presentation from Kyle Hill about generative AI recently, and I decided, you know what, I think I'm going to do something like this on my quote unquote main channel as well. So I basically want to do a little bit of a continuation to kind of go over some things that he did and kind of give not necessarily rebuttal or anything, but just some more things to kind of kick around and kind of think about how humanity we have kind of altered our progression as a species. Um, just to really quickly knock out of the way, I have no scientific degrees whatsoever. I don't even have a bachelor's in anything. The closest thing I can kind of consider myself is a little bit of a philosopher, just because I like to kind of be informed and I have a lot of existentialism that I struggle with. But I wouldn't even really say that gives me enough qualifications to make some sort of presentation on this. But I felt compelled to anyway because a few years ago, me and some really close friends had a very long discussion about where humanity was kind of progressed. And this was well before ChatGPT. This was well before, like, even really the concept of like fake news and fake Facebook accounts, spreading misinformation, things like that. This was like about 2010, 2011. So we were kind of a bit on our way to get into to where we are, but like, we had no clue what technology was going to do to get us to this point. And when I was kicking this around with my friends, the first thing that came to my mind was that we are going to have a new renaissance. And I mean that in a very artistic sense because I kind of look at things like this, right? So if I already alluded that I have a music YouTube and I have a gaming one. So I have different interests, right? My normal 9 to 5 type jobs, like I actually work 3 different ones, and each one kind of plays into what I normally do. So I'm a medical technologist. I work with lab. I work in a lab with simulation dummies to kind of like teach people how to do procedures. One of my other jobs is I teach at a music school, and then another job I have is more like event coordination. So all 3 of those jobs may keep in this new future because AI can help with certain aspects, but for the most part, my jobs are quote unquote safe. But even before all that, let's focus on the music aspect first, right? So I've been a musician for the majority of my life. If you guys really want to check out some music or just some things that I kick around on my music channel, I'll leave a link on that. But I was heavy in my music phase when I went to this art renaissance type thing. In fact, I was with my most successful project. We were doing tours from time to time, and we were doing shows pretty consistently and making some good money. So for a brief period of my life, I basically worked and lived off of my music, which was a great experience. And when I started thinking about things, I'm just like, okay, a lot of people are going to have such a diverse level of skills that all basically stem from either data input or teaching or supervising and things like that. And some of that's still going to hold over. But a lot of like the regular 9 to 5 office corporate person isn't really going to have anything to do with themselves. And I think the pandemic was a really good way to show just what human ingenuity and human nature is going to do. So a lot of people struggled with depression, isolation, things like that when they were basically locked in their homes for, however long, depending on what state you were on and what your political ideology was and all that stuff. I think everyone basically experienced what it was like to be self-sustained, or I should say more self-contained, you know. Some people would be doing their work from home, others people would not, and they were getting some sort of extended stimulus type thing, or they were getting basically unemployment and things like that. And I kind of think all these things are a little bit of a test bed to kind of just see where life is going to be about 10 years from now. But, we took care of one singular thing, which was, what are we going to do for a living? Well, one way or another, income was coming in. Was it a lot? Probably not, but hopefully it kept you by, and hopefully between that and your savings, you were able to keep doing things. So that was one aspect taken care of. The next thing was boredom. What do we do? I know what I did. I was going to school at the time, and I ended up just graduating and being like, okay, well, I have some months to kill before I ended up moving to another state with my wife so she could get her master's and start her schooling. And I just started doing a bunch of creative stuff. It started with doing some stuff on YouTube with my gaming thing. Then I started writing more and more songs, even though I haven't been performing or doing much, blah, blah, blah. The point was, I relied on something I'd already been doing, which was utilizing my musicianship and doing an art. And I think that's exactly what a lot of other people are going to do. They are going to find that once they are basically furloughed, they don't have a reason to be in the workforce anymore. First, what we need to do is we need to recognize as like a country like the United States, for example, we don't really need to work to live. We don't need to do that anymore. We've been not necessarily self sufficient, but we've had an economy in motion to basically keep ourselves in a perpetual state of production, thanks to sending things over to third world countries and other places, and basically just market off of our consumerism here in America and more of supervisory roles of just watching people while they do the products. And I'm going to get to that in a little bit as well. So okay, cool, all that stuff's taken care of. We need a universal basic income. That's where that's basically headed. A lot of states have considered it more recently within the past few years, especially after the pandemic. So that's a plus of it happening. A lot of states are realizing they're not utilizing their taxes and their resources well. So I think evaluating and kind of seeing how much we really can afford to give people might be a good, sustainable, long-term thing to do. Now, I know there's a lot of financial and economic impacts on something like that, and I'm going to 100% be honest, I am not intelligent enough to know all of that without some sort of degree or working in that field. However, the financial aspect is going to come down to we are going to have too many people who aren't able to find a job because they are 100% replaced. And not 50-50, not 60-40, 100%. There is no reason to do this because a corporation in America is going to want to make millions more on setting an algorithm and having one IT guy monitor it than to have 50, 60 employees and, divvy it up from there. They're not going to want to do that. So if we can take care of the financial aspect by having a universal basic income, what we're obviously going to need to do is to really look at inflation and how we pay taxes and how our income is generated. And we're going to have to basically smoothly transition over time to no one working who doesn't need to be or has a job that's been completely replaced by AI. And then shifting productivity to not be a consumer capitalist Americanized version. Productivity is going to come off of what you are doing as a person. So for the longest time, it was me and my music, right? Because I was a musician. I was touring. I was recording. I was selling albums, making merch, playing out, things like that. That was productivity, but a lot of people wouldn't consider that productivity because, I don't have a 9-to-5 job. I don't have a stable income, things like that. All of that is going to change. We are going to start looking at what we do and what we put out as our internal being, almost like we did hundreds of years ago when a blacksmith would, build stuff for his local community, when a cobbler would, make shoes for his local community, things like that. We're going to start shrinking back down to the smaller scale and looking at our immediate impact around people, right? And it doesn't just have to be music, right? I'm a musician and I teach at a music school. A lot of the kids that I see are extremely interested in music, but there's so many other things. Sports is going to be another big thing that, generates that spectator capability with the performance aspect. I think movies and things like that are going to get made more on the small scale. And again, let's look at the pandemic, right? We had a lot of people who just suddenly decided to do what I'm doing right now, pop open their phone and then do a video. And a lot of YouTubers have suddenly come up. A lot of Instagrammers, TikTokers, all that stuff. People are now making money off of just simply being at home, not doing anything. So I think 100% we're already going to continue that momentum. A lot of companies are kind of pushing back towards the whole work from home type thing and want to restrict us from having freedom again, being able to do stuff. But, that's going to implode. And I think it's going to be much easier if we have a smoother transition on how to get to this point, rather than just be like, no, we're going back to work 2, 3, 5 years from now max, when AI has replaced these things. Now we're exactly how we were at the beginning of the pandemic, where people are buying all these unnecessary things, not having money, and then suddenly we're in another recession, right? That's where my knowledge of economics kind of extends to. So, okay, we have ourselves a little bit of a renaissance, right? Well, that's not going to cover every aspect. Not everyone is going to feel inclined to be a creative driven individual. Not everyone is going to have the physical capability to be to participate in a sport. And, that's only so much. So what else are we going to do? Well, media, right? We're going to consume media a lot more, and we already have ease of access to it as it is. I said movies and, like TV and things like that, they're going to be generated more and more and more. And I think we're going to have more of like a local access cable TV style rise, like we did in the late 80s, early 90s, of just anyone and everyone kind of just like having a full time streaming media platform that just is like basically a hub of TikTok that like flows into itself. You'll always have like a narrative or something because all of these will be curated by the AI to keep you entertained, right? Now, that's a little bit of a slippery slope because how do we kind of compensate for that, right? That's still our mentality. I'm strictly speaking to a first world or more realistically an American audience when I say these things, but I think they're still applicable across the board, right? We still need to get paid for the content that we put out. And I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there. Just follow me here, right? This is a long thing. I'm trying to condense as much as I can anyway. So we have this access to putting out all of this media and things like that. We're going to obviously be using ChatGPT and other generative AI to help us create and structure this stuff. What I think we're going to need to start doing is taking a look at copyright laws and how the creative income is driven. And we're going to need to basically marginalize how we use ChatGPT and still have the source be the income driver. So basically what I'm saying is I'm making a video right now. If I decide to use ChatGPT to write up my script, help with my promoting and things like that, I'm still doing the majority of it. I put in the actual source of information to get a result back, but I'm also doing the work of this video, for example. So, like I said, like YouTube, social media, things like that, all of that is going to generate a level of income, and ChatGPT is maybe going to get a percentage, but it should still go primarily to the artist. When we look at copyrights, well, it's kind of the same thing. Copyright law has been very messed up for like a long time now. I know this as a musician who has a copyright on one of his albums. So I know it's a lengthy thing. It's a hard thing. It needs to be modernized. And this is a great opportunity to do it. I do think the services that I'll take it back. I do think the people who own ChatGPT and other generative services should get a percentage because there is an amount of work that is now reduced through using it. How are we going to do it though? Is it going to be like a subscription-based service? Is it going to be a one-time payment type thing? Is it going to be a generative revenue? So, every time someone watches a video, they get 0.05% of that revenue from the watch or the player, things like that. I don't know, but that is kind of the next logical step, utilizing a platform and a structure of copyright and distribution that we already have in place. Okay? So now we kind of get into, all right, our media consumption is going to skyrocket. The people who are artistic or athletic are going to be doing a lot more of that stuff. So what is the normal 9-to-5er type person who has no skill set in anything artistic or athletic going to do? Well, one thing that I think has been slowly been built towards since about the 80s is the concept of supervisory roles, right? So in a lot of places we have supervisors, and I mean, they were rife in the 90s at least, where you'd see it's like you just have a title. Okay, you don't really do anything. You just have a title, you make a little bit more money, but you still basically do the same amount of work of everybody else. The only end result is that you get to look at it before it gets shipped off and sent to someone higher up, right? Why can't we necessarily take that approach towards our generative AI? What if we have clusters of AI bots who are working on a program, a system, a script, or what have you, and all we really need is just one person to supervise that cluster and fin through the results? What are we doing here? What edits need to be adjusted? What for writing code, like what mistakes have happened, or like what generative thing is not working to get to the end result. I feel supervisor is maybe too specific of a term, but it's someone who's going to be like, you're just reviewing. You're a supervisor or you're a reviewer of these clusters of AIs that are creating content or product or what have you. So we can work that up the chain, right? So we'll start this on a very small scale. So first, we need to create a product, right? We're a company. I'm the supervisor of this AI cluster. I type in what the people in the higher up are saying we want. Okay, boom, we do that. The AI cluster presents me with this product. Okay, cool. I've done one part. Now we have a marketing director, right? A marketing supervisor who is now going to take the product that I have just done and they're going to use ChatGPT to create a mock-up of this marketing. And then once that's done, they present that to the board, who is then going to decide yay or nay. Are we going to do this? Are we going to adjust it? Blah, 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 what have you. I've kind of skipped a whole bunch of steps on a corporate scale because all of those are basically taken care of by the generative AI, right? So a lot of companies are going to strip down the amount of people they have anyway. Why not have a handful of supervisors, reviewers, people who can kind of just keep the whole system going? It's almost like, so I was in the military. I was in the U.S. Navy, and every branch has something called warrant officers. And they're in between enlisted and actual officers, right? So when we think of enlisted, basically they do all the grunt work. That's basically what we do. When we get to officers, they're the people who are in charge, the supervisors who are like, hey, go do this well. And then someone in the middle, not the warrant officers, but the NCOs, the people who are enlisted and a little bit higher up, they supervise everybody else doing their stuff. A warrant officer is basically a specialist who has the privileges and rights of basically an officer with the skills, technical experience, and hands-on abilities of more of an enlisted. So I think a lot of companies are going to enlist, I shouldn't have used that word considering it's going to confuse everybody, but they're going to basically take the warrant officer approach and they're going to have specialists on top of reviewers and supervisors to keep this entire global corporatization mentality together on something that still makes a little bit of sense. And there's still going to be a lot of demand for that. We're going to need people who have been in the game for a while, but not to the scale where it's like, all right, we can just phase you out, buy you out, and retire you. We need people who are still paying attention to things, still being on the cutting edge, and help with the reviewers because they're only going to know how to supervise the group that is creating. They are not going to know the long-term benefits. Maybe they will. Maybe we can somehow combine the warrant officer mentality with these supervisors and reviewers. I don't think it's going to work. I think it's going to be something that needs to get phased over time. So we might as well have little distinctions, right? So it's almost like you're going to have a supervisor of a supervisor, but what that other supervisor is going to do is really have more of a specialist skill set to help smooth the whole process along. So that means a lot of people are still going to be working. It's going to just, unfortunately, for the next few years, incentivize the people to bust their ass to keep doing it and hope that a company's still going to keep you at the end of the day. I don't really think that's likely for the vast majority of people, but at the same time, it's not like you have to do this. You can start learning how to, play a guitar or paint art, or, if you're still in a relatively good age, you can, do softball or, play flag football or something. It doesn't have to be to the grand scale that we see things. And that's another thing that I'm going to kind of touch on before I start going into some other stuff. We're going back to that small, local, isolated community like we did hundreds of years ago, right? We don't need to, if we're being a musician, for example, we don't need to worry about selling a platinum level album and touring the entire continent. We don't need to do that. We can play little shows at small bars while our album gets some circulation on Spotify or YouTube or whatever your ending platform is. We need to kind of make that process a bit more okay. A lot of people don't really view that as successful. Well, what they're really saying is that you're not being productive in a traditional way. Success and productivity aren't really synonymous. We've just unfortunately been using them in that context for a long time. So that kind of applies to everything, right? Our small communities, like I live in Chicago. Chicago is going to have its own form of media production, of artistry, of sports, athletics, things like that. Kind of like how we did 100 years ago before we had TV and we could just watch how another state or another country does something. It's a natural regression and progression of human nature, right? because we're incorporating a lot of things of the thousands upon thousands of years of civilization we've built up on with the futuristic mentality of, okay, well, we don't need to do this anymore, so what do we do instead? Well, we go back on what we used to do. It's hardwired in us, right? And that's going to kind of lead me to something that maybe a lot of people don't want to hear and don't want to think about, and I totally get this as I'm about to say it. I think another natural progression is humanity, for those who cannot be a supervisor or an artist or an athlete, they're going to take on the more subservient role of kind of just doing what AI tells them. So you can kind of use your imagination on how bad that could be. You know, we can think of like a Skynet situation, things like that. I don't think it's going to be like that. However, I know personally, if someone were to just tell me that, hey, this robot has decided that you're going to do this for the rest of your life, like, well, who is that robot? Is that robot God or some, you know, equivalent to whatever your religious ideology is? Probably not. It's just a cluster of AI, you know, something that we put information into. How is it going to know how your life's going to pan out? How is it going to guide and direct and shape you, you know? But that's kind of where we're at, right? Unfortunately, civilization for the longest time was always a ruler class and a ruled class. Now, do I like that? Hell no. But it's kind of been hardwired in our DNA for thousands of years. And unfortunately, most countries that we live in kind of still have that, you know? But I don't necessarily know the pros and the cons of something like that. I just know it's what a likely scenario will happen. And I would imagine that those people are just going to kind of, you know, they're just going to kind of drift. They're just going to kind of exist and do things as is. Now, that could be a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because if we don't have to worry about making income anymore, we can basically do whatever we want, you know? I personally think that the recent rise of making drugs like marijuana and psychedelics more available to the masses, or just straight up legal, I think that's been a really good thing, and I think it'll help people and help them find themselves, and then hopefully shape and give themselves drive to find something to do. You know, humans, we can't sit idle. You know, like, look at my hands. I'm moving my hands all over the place because I'm just sitting. I can't just keep doing nothing. Most humans are like that. I mean, why do prisons exist? We put people in prisons to prevent them from doing stuff. And what do? We come up with structure. We come up with our own set of rules. We have our own personal discipline to get us through an experience like that. Humans need these guides all the time, and we will create them even if ChatGPT or some sort of generative AI does or does not for us. We will basically adapt. That's what I think is going to happen. Now, all that being said, this is going to be a slow, lengthy process. So a lot of people who are either completely against it or are basically just afraid of it and aren't really sure what they're going to do. I think what's going to happen within the next 10 years is we're going to have a massive influx of countries deciding to have open border type policies, and they're going to basically import people to work for them. And maybe they'll pay them a better wage, maybe they'll pay them a worser wage, but, you know, there'll be benefits and blah, blah, blah. And the reason why I say something like that is because look at the rise of digital nomad visas within the last few years. Granted, the pandemic has definitely been a factor for something like that. However, I think these countries are using them as a sort of test bed to kind of see, like, okay, you know, we're slowly getting to a more globalized world in a positive way. So let's kind of see what it's like to just have a hodgepodge of people be in our country, you know, and just be there. You know, maybe they're not necessarily generating income for the country that they're in, but they're in there, and just by living, you know, you still got to pay rent, you still got to buy food, you still got to do things like that. And maybe that's helping. Now, granted, these are in more smaller, poorer countries, or in countries that are traditionally not, you know, first choice for people who are moving. But this is going to happen across the board. Some countries are going to be a lot more pioneering about it and a lot more upfront about doing it. Some countries are going to be very slow, very old world. And then, not to be disrespectful, we're going to have countries where it's completely not feasible, not for 50 to 100 years, because their infrastructure is not set, and There is no system in place to basically build off of that. So one could imagine that a country that is struggling with its economy and its sole income is based off of its resources would basically be like, hey, yeah, we'll definitely take you. You can be a supervisor, right? You may not be able to be a supervisor of an AI cluster because you don't have the comprehension or the skill set. But if you've been doing, X amount of corporate work for the longest time, I think you'd definitely be a valuable asset when it comes to data entry for resource management, right? That's what would make sense to me. So within the next 10 years, I think countries are going to be a lot more open about who they let in, have either accelerated visa or citizenship programs, and they're going to allow for people to basically get in there and just do the work while, you either get with the times or you get left behind. But at the very least, you have more time to figure out and get to where you're going. Now, I guess I'll kind of end all this because I think I kind of covered a lot of the stuff that Kyle had brought up. Um, there are going to be people that get left behind, right? No one wants to say that. No one wants to admit that. And no one wants to be that. And I think it's a very healthy fear because we are doing something, like Kyle said, that has never happened before in human history. And we are at a point of no return, right? I don't know if I'd put it in the title or not, but what I'm going to call this renaissance is a post-stopic renaissance. And the reason why is because I think at this point we will be past both a utopia and or a dystopia, because that's really all a matter of perspective, right? Not going to get into the philosophy side of things, not going to get in the whole existentialist and stuff. But what I think is, since we're in a post-stopic renaissance, we are past that point of, is everything going great? Is everything going bad? Well, no, it doesn't matter. We are just continuing on. We are just moving forward. And we, as a species, have just either adapted or we fell apart completely. I don't think a nuclear annihilation is going to happen. I do think World War III is on the horizon, but I'm not going to get much more into that. And whether we survive it or, we kind of just scrape by in terms of like a Star Trek situation where it takes 200 years for us to get back into, like modern times and stuff like that. I don't know, but these AI systems aren't going to be shut down. We can EMP all of our electronics. We could lose a lot of our infrastructure, but the knowledge is there and the systems are there. So no matter what, we are going to have to face it. And we may delay it through something as extravagant as, World War III or what have you, but it's going to be there. And that's why I think it's past that concept of a utopia or a dystopia. So I'm not really sure how else someone would phrase that, but that's the term I came up with a couple of years ago when me and my friends had revisited this sort of renaissance. So that's what I'll call it for now. Anyway, I didn't really anticipate for this video to be this long. I think I covered the majority of the points that are in it. If there's something that I missed, maybe I'll do a couple of shorts to kind of tack on and get to where I was going. I should have probably rewatched Kyle's video before I decided to do this, but that's the thing, right? This is kind of a great demonstration of what I'm talking about. I have free time, and I don't need to worry about income right now. So what should I be doing? Well, I want to be productive. What's being productive? Putting out this video, talking about something that I had seen. And, I'm not trying to make any money off of this. I'm trying to make people aware and kind of see a whole new perspective on things. That's really what we're going to be doing 5 to 10 years from now. I'm not a futurist. I'm not a scientist. I have no idea what our timetable is going to be for these things. But I think for the most part, between 5 to 10 years, assuming World War III doesn't happen, we are going to be at that level where it's like, the first couple of months of the pandemic where we're all at home, we're not doing much. But what we are doing is almost truer to ourselves. We are just going to return to a simpler mentality and almost a simpler time, which is complete irony because we're at a point where our lives are completely governed by an artificial construct that we created that is supremely intelligent compared to us. But, we're humans and we're limited by history. We fall back on what we have seen before or what we have done before. I don't think anything is going to happen where AI is going to tell us our future and help us strive to it. I think what's really going to happen is that humanity is going to kind of break into a whole bunch of subgroups. We're going to have people who are supervisors and reviewers. They're going to be kind of doing their own thing. We're going to have the artists and the athletes, and they're going to go off and they're going to do their own thing. We're going to have the people who decide to move to other countries, and they're going to keep manufacturing in a traditional way today. And they're going to be their own group, right? I can see a lot of potential downsides for that. Definitely lean more towards the dystopia because now we have a classist system that's on a global scale. I don't want that. I don't want anything like that to happen to humanity. But again, who's to say that this isn't just kind of a natural progression and this is always where humanity was supposed to be, right? Who's to say? Is it going to be AI? Are we going to trust AI with such an important decision like that? Probably not. But that's not going to stop AI. That's not going to stop the next 5 to 10 years. And unfortunately, we can't let it stop us either. So these are just some thoughts to think about. If you have anything to add to this, definitely appreciate the discussion in the comments. I'm not trying to peddle it so I can get some more views on YouTube, things like that. I just think this is something that there's enough people out there who, if they don't listen to Kyle, they keep up with other scientists and people who talk about these type of things and, may either be a little bit concerned or have their own views and perspectives. And maybe this is a way to help motivate you guys to share your own experiences as well. So thank you, guys. English is hard, right? Just flubbing right at the ending. Thank you all very much. I appreciate the watches, and you all have yourselves a good one.